Hey, Year 12, welcome back to another lesson. This is lesson 4 on Buddhism. What we're going to look at today is a bit of a bigger dot point. We're going to look at how Buddhism defines gender and gender roles. We're also going to look at the impact it's had on gender roles over time, especially in its country of origin, but also around the world. So we're going to start with this is our syllabus dot point, so that can be your heading. We're going to start with some revision again. In your books, I want you to write down these 2 questions, revision questions, and answer them. So number 1 is, what are some important places and texts in Buddhism? And then our second question is, what are some important symbols, rituals, and customs in Buddhism? Okay, so maybe have a quick look at your notes from last lesson, and then answer those and give it a go, see how you do. Again, with key terminology, I want you to practice that. Now remember, there are 3 more that you should have here. You've got the Pali Canon from last lesson. We have the Sutra and what that means, and we've also got the Vinaya. Okay, so you can add those in there. Again, test yourself on it, just constantly revising those key terms. So once you've done that, you can start our normal lesson. So here, I'm just going to talk you through each point about gender roles in Buddhism and how it's defined within the belief system. So basic Buddhist teaching from the get-go teaches and regards men and women as equal but different, if that makes sense. I might even put that in. So the idea is they both have equal roles of importance, but they see it as different in how each gender goes about it. So there'll be more on that later. So I'll just explain it now. So the idea of how they may see it is something that the monks would have taught you if we went to the Buddhist temple, sadly. But the idea that they see that the function that men and women serve is equal but different. So an example of that is if we look at eyes and ears. Both of them serve extremely important functions, but they are still both different. Do you know what I mean? So your eyes help you see, but your ears help you listen and to hear things. So it's saying that they are both of equal importance, but they just serve different functions. That's sort of their view on it. Both men and women are taught the same Dharma, so the same teachings. There's no separate education for men or women, it's all the same. That's how Buddha envisioned it. And both should pursue the middle way to achieve nirvana, which is following the teachings of Buddhism. You know, the 4 Noble Truths, the 8-fold paths, the 5 precepts. So that's sort of our first point, is pretty much we get this picture of equality between the genders. However, there still is a bit of history behind gender roles in Buddhism. So initially, Buddha resisted women a place in the Sangha, okay, as nuns. Mostly this is because of the cultural impact that, so you got to think as well that they're still humans. So the cultural, we briefly touched on it the other day when we looked at the Indian caste system and how they rank individuals within society. So typically in Indian culture where Buddhism was born, women are particularly ranked quite low. So while you've got monks and male sort of followers and leaders in Buddhism, they've still got all those cultural baggage and beliefs that they've grown up with that they see as normal coming through as well. So initially he resisted women a place in the Sangha as nuns, or having a role in the importance of teaching other people about Buddhism. A lot to do with he thought the impact that would have on the monks in terms of cultural contradictions to what they believed women's place to be in society, but also from Hindu asceticism roots, so that the concepts of asceticism and denouncing worldly possessions were exclusively sort of set for men in the background culture. So you've got that sort of idea happening with gender roles. That's some of the cultural background. But Buddha's stepmother, Mahabhajapati in Gautama, she turned up at his monastery one day with her hair cut off in monk robes surrounded by 500 women. and said we should be able to participate as well. And it was then where Buddha said, these cultural impacts, I shouldn't be as afraid of them as I am. And he sort of removed those restrictions on women. So over time you can see women initially being resisted a place, not being allowed any power or authority in the belief system, and then that being the initial continuity, and then that change happening there over time, where women are now allowed in. And when that did happen, Buddha protected women from exploitation by monks, because he obviously realised these cultural backgrounds would still probably hinder women in some way. So he wrote this into the Pali Canon, and also the Vinaya, the rules for monks and nuns. So nuns should not be called upon to sew, dye or weave for the monks. Neither will monks take for themselves donations made to nuns. So again, he's reinforcing that idea that they should be equal. If we go to the next slide, then we're sort of looking at it. So that's the sort of general view of gender as a whole, the idea that they are equal but different. Here we're going to look more closely at the different adherents, so the different types of followers of Buddhism, the two different strands of Theravada and Mahayana, and their views and roles on women, because again they differ. When we look at Theravada, again T for traditional, so the more traditional strand of Buddhism, women are initially denied positions of power and authority. Generally speaking, most monasteries and things that follow the Theravada practice are also monks as well. So they've still got that cultural baggage, for lack of a better word, with Buddhism, and their roles of how they perceive women. Our next point here is looking at there are patriarchal sort of Indian systems, so like the caste system where they ranked people. They still have a huge influence of people who are in that Theravada practice. There's also evidence of that for any women who were in the Theravada practice, because again, remember Buddha said that women are allowed into the practice over here, so they can't technically deny them, but those cultural or that cultural baggage they have is evident here. So they have 8 special rules that they place on women to ensure their subservience towards men within the Theravada practice. I'm not going to write all 8, but an example for one is a nun can never correct a monk, whilst a monk may still correct a nun. So that idea of the monk is smarter and they know best compared to the women. So those old traditional constraints on gender still exist there. In contemporary, so that's sort of that Theravada side, they're a lot stricter and more traditional, I suppose, with their gender roles. Whereas the Mahayana Buddhism system, which again is the strand that the temple down in Wollongong follows, it's more contemporary in terms of it's more current and it's more liberal in how it views the role of men and women. Here there's a bigger emphasis on that idea that men and women are equal but different. They really, so that eyes and ears sort of example there. And they live that out. An example of the impact that it's changed for women is that the Wollongong temple itself is purely run by nuns. There are no monks there at all, so it's 100% females that run it. So that's a testament to itself. Buddhist teachers today recognise that Western women also don't accept this idea of subservience, and that's becoming a globalised trend around the world as well. So a lot of their recent teachings and books address women equally with men as well. So you can see the impact that globalisation of Western culture has had on Buddhism as well, which is quite interesting as well in looking at how that's changed over time. Also the sort of ideas that many women have become respected Buddhist leaders today. So if we look here is to the right here, the Mahayana Buddhism has a female deity called Tara. So deities they're not on the same level as Buddha, but they're sort of seen as pretty holy and prestigious. So that's a thing of Tara there. So again, that's just showing acceptance of the role that women play and the important role that women play in Buddhism. Okay, that statue would have been very expensive to make, and it also makes a big statement. So that's symbolic there of the acceptance that it has. If we go to the next slide here as well, Buddhism, so obviously it was impacted by Hinduism, which is the main Indian belief system, but it changed the sort of cards where it's saying that anyone can achieve enlightenment. It's not just restricted to upper class or men. So the impact that those gender roles had then on society is suddenly women are now seen as having an important role and function within society, because they're being simply seen as equal as men. So that's a big impact Buddhism had on the society and culture at the time. Naturally, as Buddhism became more popular, it's challenging the inequalities of the Hindu-based caste system that they have within society. So it's not just having an effect on women who become monks or nuns, sorry. It's also affecting people who don't even believe in Buddhism at all. The fact that that belief system is having an impact on the social ranking system in the countries is very evident to how it's influenced gender roles in society as well. And lastly here, because women can join Buddhism, a lot of them find freedom and independence following that sort of belief system, because without it, in certain cultures around the world, like India, they didn't have much equality in comparison to men. So that sort of, again, highlights the importance that Buddhism has had in terms of how it's influenced gender roles. So this, in sort of a nutshell, hopefully that's given you some idea of how Buddhism defines gender and gender roles. Again, generally the idea is that men and women should be equal. When we look in reality between the two different strands of Buddhism, Theravada being more traditional and Mahayana being more modern, you can see there are some differences there. The last thing I want you to do is read this handout here. You can print it and glue it out. It's a bit more in the history of the role of women in Indian society. So for example, a widow had to kill herself by jumping onto the funeral pyre of her husband. Now, a funeral pyre is where they line your body up on top of lots of different sort of planks of wood, and then they set it on fire. So the idea that the woman had to burn herself alive when her husband died, that's the sort of level of traditionalism that was affected on gender roles at the time. And then later on it will go into how Buddha, so a lot of this is kind of a parable in here that Buddha is showing the teachings that men and women should be equal and why they're equal. So give that a read and highlight it and put it in your book as well. And after you've done that, answer those two questions. That's it.